Hey friends, welcome to Econverse. My name is Abrar and I am a student just like you. I still remember that feeling 1 year back when I was sitting my GCSEs for economics. I was so perplexed when faced with those macroeconomic policies, exchange rates, the inflation, and everything else. When I was preparing, just like any other student, I went online. I started looking up for resources to understand the concepts. And guess what? I found nothing. Absolutely nothing for GCSE Economics online. After a lot of hard work and most importantly, true passion for economics from within, I went on to top economics in Oman for my GCSEs. Now, Econverse is my attempt to provide fellow students around the world an ecosystem that makes learning economics a truly fun and enjoyable process. Now, the goal of this ecosystem is to provide a framework within which you can access notes, past papers, flashcards, topic by topic explanations, and most importantly, a community. Of a student community within which you can start to learn how to truly think like an economist. In this video, we are going to be exploring what economics truly is and understanding how the subject is structured at GCSEs. Let's start by scoping the subject. Now, scoping the subject is a method that I learned from someone called Ali Abdal. I'm pretty sure you might have heard of him. So, what he says is scoping the subject is when you break a whole subject or a topic into smaller, more manageable chunks that make revision a far more easier and enjoyable process. So when you scope the subject down into smaller topics, you're able to take a good look at all the topics that you have within a whole subject or a topic, and that makes revision so much more easier. So let's start by scoping economics. So if you take a look at economics, how I look at this is it's broken down into two major chunks. One is your microeconomics, that refers to economics in relation to firms and households. And then you have the macroeconomics, which refers to the economics with government policy making and countries and how it affects global economies. Let's start by breaking micro down into further more smaller chunks. So you have microeconomics. It's broken down into three major chunks, in my opinion. So firstly, for micro, you have the basic economic problem. Now, what does the basic economic problem mean? So this is basically the fundamental aspect of microeconomics that you'll be learning. So this has four main topics in it. It talks about the idea of scarcity in economics, the idea that nothing is infinite and everything is finite. Now, this is particularly important because the second topic talks about something we call factors of production. Now, I'm just going to write it in acronyms. So, the factors of production are basically the resources that are available to an economy for production. And now we talk about the third topic, that is opportunity cost. So, opportunity cost is a topic in economics that talks about decision making. So, whenever you have scarcity, you're forced to make a decision, and the opportunity cost argument talks about how decisions can have trade offs and benefits, and it argues how decisions are made. Last but not the least, you'll be looking at a fascinating diagram which is called PPF, the Production Possibility Frontier, or some people call it PPC, the Production Possibility Curve. But basically, both of them are the same. Then, the second more important topic that you'll be looking at is something called the allocation of resources. So now we've learned that resources are scarce and only finite. The second aspect talks about how you allocate these resources in the economy. Now, this is probably one of the most fundamental topics of microeconomics. In this section, you'll be looking at, firstly, what is the role of markets? How do they work? How do they help in allocating resources? Another very interesting topic is the different types of markets. So you look at the different types of markets. So now there are three main types of markets that you'll be looking at. One is your planned economy, the other one is your market economy, and last but not the least, you have your mixed economy. Now, one of the most important concepts for economics, for the whole of economics, is demand and supply. Now, this is something you'd probably never forget for your life. It is such a crucial topic. Now, within demand and supply, you'll be looking at how demand works, how supply works, and how they help in something called price determination. And then you'll be looking at, hopefully you'd be looking at price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. So that is basically a concept of how demand and supply could change in relation to the changes in prices. And then the last topic of this section is probably the most interesting topic for the whole of microeconomics, in my opinion. I mean, you could have different favorites. And this is the concept of market failure. So this talks about how governments can intervene when markets fail and how do markets fail. So it's particularly one facet of economics that I find really interesting. Now for the third section, since I don't have any space left. Okay, wait, I could try to fit it in. Let's see. So the third section of economics is called the micro decision makers. So now we've talked about how resources are scarce. We've discussed how they could be allocated. And now we're going to be looking at who allocates these resources and how it works for them. Basically, we'd be exploring each decision maker in a microeconomy in depth. So one of the most important decision makers is obviously firms. Then you have your households. You have workers that work for the firm. And now you might have trade unions. I'm not sure about this. Just a second. So you might have trade unions. Now, I heard that it was removed from the spec, so I'm not sure about that. Please let me know in the comments. So the whole scoping that I've done of this is based around the Cambridge IGCSE Economics textbook. If you do use another textbook and you would like me to scope it for you, please do let me know in the comment section. Now, another aspect of micro decision makers is the banks. And in relation to firms, you will also learn a fundamental topic of economics, which is called market structures. You talk about how different markets in the economy are. Like, the structure basically talks about how competitive they are and how this affects the functioning of the firms. Now, I think I've scoped micro. I'll just leave it there for a few minutes, for a second or so that you can take a look at it. So essentially what you're doing is you're breaking the whole of a topic into three main ideas. So you've broken microeconomics into three whole chunks. Firstly, you have the basic economic problem, then you have the allocation of resources, and then you have micro decision makers. I think that would just make revision a far more easier process for you now. So if you look at micro, you just know there are three main topics to look at, and within which you have subtopics. So that personally I felt that could make revision far more easier. Now, next up, let's look at the second most important aspect of economics, and that is macroeconomics. Personally, I think macroeconomics is what economics a subject really fun. So the thing with macroeconomics is you learn how everything intertwines with each other, and you see policies and how governments act, which makes it really fascinating as you learn through. So, with macroeconomics, there's 5 main aspects of it that you'll be looking at. So, let me just draw 5 arrows. Firstly, you'll be discovering the role of governments. So, what are governments and how do they function in the first place? What are their roles and what are their duties? Secondly, you'd be looking at something called macro objectives of governments. So if you look at macro objectives, you can break it down into essentially 5 main objectives. So you have something called economic growth, you have inflation, you have employment, you do have balance of payments, and you have something called redistribution of income. Now, income in economics is referred to using the letter Y. So, another aspect of economics, macroeconomics, is macro policies. Now, this is probably the most interesting because it comes with different ways of looking at things. You will realize that every policy would have its own advantages and drawbacks. So macro policies are broken down into 2 main aspects. You have demand side and you have supply side policies. So as simple as it sounds, demand side policies are targeted at the demand of economies, and supply side target the supply of economies. So demand side has 2 major types of policies. There are monetary policies and fiscal policies. And supply side basically operates under the whole of supply side policies, and they have 6 different policies within, which we would be looking at when we make a video on that. Then you have something called economic development. So this is basically the whole concept of development in an economy. So I'll just explain it to you as short as I could. So economic growth shows a numerical development in the economy, whereas economic development discusses the qualitative development of an economy. So this has particularly 3 major sections. So you have the living standards of an economy. So that talks about the healthcare, the education and everything. Then you have poverty that you talk about in depth and how it could be alleviated. And you have the concept of population. You talk about overpopulation and underpopulation and how does this affect economies. Now, last but not the least, one of the most interesting and really confusing topics to me personally is international trade. Now, this is fundamental to economies around the world, especially today, given the ideals of free trade and markets that are being globalized continuously. So, within international trade, you will essentially be looking at 4 main ideas. So, you have the idea of exchange rates, that's a fundamental topic. Then you do have the idea of trade and protectionism, there is free trade and why not free trade. You have balance of payments that is covered under this and how the trade affects the balance of payments. Lastly, you'll be looking at something called specialization in trade. You'll be looking at the ideas of specialization. Alright, so what have we done here for macroeconomics? So essentially, now macroeconomics, we've broken it down into 5 major chunks. So you have the role of the government, which is quite simple. Then you have the macro objectives. Now, one of the things about macro objectives are it is essentially a topic
with all these 5 subtopics that are also covered in equal depth. Then you have your macro policies, which is really interesting. You have economic development and qualitative development in economics that is discussed. And then you have international trade and how an economy works at the global level. So that is essentially how it works. So what we've done here is, in about 1.5 pages, we've scoped the whole of economics. Now this is something I'd recommend for you to do before you start revising any subject for that matter, because it makes the whole of revision so much easier. Trust me guys, when you understand that you can see your subject in 1 page or 2 pages, you understand how simple it is and how easily you could focus your revision on all the different topics that actually matter.
In this video, hopefully, I've given you all a good roadmap of the whole of GCSE Economics. In the upcoming videos, the goal is to give topic by topic explanations for microeconomics content followed by macroeconomic content. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Have a lovely evening. I'll hopefully see you tomorrow.